One of the best-known Disney animated films is the story called The Lion King, and it became adapted into an even more famous Broadway theatrical production. It still appears all around the country, some of the most sumptuous sets. Many people do repeat seeings of it. Anyone that goes to Disney World, there's more than enough opportunity to engage with the different characters in The Lion King. The story is rather timeless, and of course, since it's dealing with kingship, it caught my attention. You might remember that the young lion, Simba, is a child but is wanting to already be grown up beyond his years. His very wise father, Mustafa, knows that Simba must take a great deal of time to learn how to really become a king. But see, all Simba can see from the very beginning of it is that he wants to be able to order people around. He would like to be able to dictate things. He would like to be, as my sister says, large and in charge. And as you see them, he's small in stature, whereas Mustafa's, very large and in charge. So one of the very early songs in the film is when Simba's talking to the other animals around him, telling that he wants to become a king. The verse that caught me was this one. Let every creature go for broke and sing. Let's hear it in the herd and on the wing. It's gonna be King Simba's finest fling. Oh, I just can't wait to be king. If you know the story, Mustafa's brother, who's Simba's uncle, Scar, has very different designs on the kingship. He's nefarious and a difficult person. He ultimately tricks Simba into doing something that ultimately leads, although it is Scar's fault, it ultimately leads to the death of Mustafa. Yes, another Disney movie with a death early on in the film, shades of Bambi, but nevertheless, you have the death of Mustafa, and Simba has to go away in shame because he thinks he's caused his father's death, literally banished from his kingdom. He went from saying, I can't wait to be king, to almost an idea that I'm never going to be king, I'm never going to return home. Well, it's a Disney film, so it's not going to end that way. Even Bambi ends more nicely by the time you get to the end of it. Same with Dumbo. But nevertheless, by the end of the film, much wisdom has come. And you see, there's the lesson that the Disney film is teaching, that with the use of power must come great wisdom, and there's great pitfalls because of our ability to be tempted beyond our own ability to do the right thing. Simba finally does become the great and wise king. But it wasn't something he wished for. It wasn't something he grasped. And he learned it came with no real power as much as it came from being the proper and right kind of person. So when Jesus appears before Pilate, and by the way, the gospel we get this evening, you've already heard it this year if you came on Good Friday. You did come on Good Friday, right? And so on Good Friday, we always read the Passion according to John every year. So it's read every time during Holy Week. It's much longer, of course, and this little section is easily passed over. We read it where people read the parts out loud and the people read one of the parts. So but this part is between Pilate and Jesus, and it's a conversation. It's useful to get an idea about Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate was a governor, if you want to call him that, but not the way you and I use the word governor. In the Roman system of government, the governors had this authority over certain areas, and then they, but basically owed their allegiance to the emperor. The further you got away from Rome, well, the less important you really were. So the idea when Pontius Pilate gets sent all the way over to modern-day Israel, he's actually being placed on the outskirts. He's nowhere near the circle of power. And like so many men like him, he becomes a petty, cruel tyrant. So did Herod, and Herod the Great as well. They became tyrants with their power, become angry in their use of it. And for Pilate, the only thing that is of concern to him is that there's a king in his midst who's going to seek to usurp his authority. That's where this conversation takes place. And Jesus, of course, tells Pilate that he's not that kind of a king, which makes no sense to Pilate because he appears to have not even a shred of religious faith or religious knowledge of any kind. All he can hear is that word king. And when Jesus says, my kingdom is not here, not of this world, he might as well have been speaking Azerbaijani to him because Pilate simply could make no sense of what that could possibly be. You and I have enough trouble making sense of it. But Jesus, speaking before his crucifixion, literally the day before his crucifixion, is speaking truth to power. He's saying that the power that's being used to subject him, the power that will cause him to be stripped of his garments, the power that will force him to carry a cross, the power that will lead to his crucifixion and his death, all of those powers are powers, but they really are not power, because the real power is God, and this death that Jesus will give on the cross is not of Roman invention or of Jewish invention or even of Satan's invention, although all three were heavily involved in the planning and the process. But the sacrifice of Christ was designed from the very beginning by an all-knowing, all-loving, all-powerful God who knows this was the only way for you and I to be freed from the bondage of our sins. The very thing that makes us free is the very thing that makes Jesus the King, King of the universe. And this kind of King of the universe is like no king we have ever seen. The power comes from being almost unrecognizable. I thought of another contemporary song that sort of illustrates this idea of kingship, and I introduced this section by saying that us that live in America and have only lived in America and only understand the American form of governments and governance, we all have our own trouble with royalty, meaning that we don't really understand what it is like to be ruled by a king or queen. Whatever we read in history books, and I learned from a great church historian when I was in seminary, almost everything you read in the books is probably more than likely not right, not correct. So, the idea that we even have some notion of what kingship is, it's just simply not part of the American experience. So it's really hard for us on a feast where it says Jesus is king to portray him, except in the way that we sort of approach the idea of kingship or queenship in history books. But you see, the real issue here is that we learn that to really be a king is to really have almost nothing. So a group called Seals and Crofts, anything but Christian, they were Baha'i, but they were really wonderful singers in the late 1970s. Some of you were not born, but it's a really good song. And there's one of their songs on their later album called I'm the King of Nothing. And a verse in there caught my attention. It goes this way. When I was 17, I dreamed of being king and having everything I wanted. But that was long ago, and my dreams did not unfold. So I'm still the king of nothing. If I could rule, I'd dance my cares away, find romance every day. I wouldn't have to listen to this poor fool say, I'm the king of nothing. Now there's an image that I think can be grasped for theological purposes, the king of nothing. It sounds almost contradictory, doesn't it? Almost in the same way, all-powerful God. We almost can't grasp what that can mean. How can you be a king of nothing and yet also be a king of everything? You see, the whole idea of power is to have things, to have control. But what we're taught about power is that inherently in the created world is materialistic. Here today, gone tomorrow. It's no real power. And I'll add this for us who are believers. Since the purpose of our life is to be lifted up, to be raised from the dead, to be saved by Jesus Christ, which is exactly why we're celebrating this Eucharist. We're offering that perfect sacrifice that can only happen if we have nothing in this world. We have to literally abandon our connection to this world to receive the destiny that we all desire. In order to be a saint, and every one of us should want to be a saint, we will also have to be a king of nothing. So getting this idea that kings are powerful and kings get to call all the shots and kings get to make the rules gets turned on its head when we deal with Jesus' Beatitudes, when he teaches, blessed are the poor in spirit, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the meek, blessed are the humble. We live in a world where the meek and the humble and the downtrodden are anything but powerful figures. They're persons who seem to have no control over their destiny. They're looked down upon by so many other people. They're seen as problems that can't be solved. There's so many different ways that we identify with this, and it's such a surprise when we learn that that's precisely who Jesus identified with. The story of his ministry over 3 years was his repetitive association with people considered undesirable, people considered unclean, women who were not respected in the way men were respected, divorced, adulterers, you name it. His constant refrain from the religious authorities is that why do you eat dinner with sinners? And of course, because he's the king of nothing, that's exactly why he does. That in order that nothingness actually opens up the door to allow grace to enter. So I found a poem that I thought's haunting as you hear it, but it really illustrates what we mean to say Jesus Christ is the King of the universe. What kind of king? I think this poem really illustrates it. Our King is calling from the hungry furrows, whilst we are cruising through the aisles of plenty. Our hoardings screen us from the man of sorrows. Our soundtracks drown his murmur, I am thirsty. He stands in line to sign in as a stranger and seek a welcome from the world he made. We see him only as a threat, a danger. He asks for clothes, we strip search him instead. And if he should fall sick, then we take care that he does not infect our private health. We lock him in the prisons of our fear, lest he unlock the prison of our wealth. But still on Sunday, we will stand and sing the praises of our hidden Lord and King. One of the worst things we can do in our discipleship is to have our worship be utterly incongruent with the way that we live our lives. The two have to be synonymous with each other, so that what we do on Sunday is what we do on every other day of the week. We may not do it in a church building, but it's not that there's a different, worship is not meant to be different in that way. It's really meant to be transforming, and we're meant to become kings of nothing, which in a materialistic, craven world is really difficult because there's so many temptations that abound. Turns out one of the great doctors of the church, these are the men and women that are canonized as saints, but were called doctors because of their great teaching authority, a 24-year young nun who really didn't accomplish much of anything except her spiritual journals, which were published after her death, made her worthy of the title Doctor of the Church, St. Teresa of Lisieux. I read this about her and just found this really fascinating. It's a way to pull everything together, that you and I want to become saints. And in order to become saints, we have to be the king of nothing. And it's very difficult to be the king of nothing because of the materialistic things in the world, things that we want to do for ourselves. The doctor of the church, St. Teresa of Lisieux, says it this way: I've always stated when I've compared myself to the saints that there is between them and me the same difference that exists between a mountain, the summit of which is lost in the sky, and an obscure grain of sand that is trodden underfoot by passers-by. Instead of becoming discouraged, I've told myself, God wouldn't know how to inspire desires that cannot be realized. So despite my littleness, I can aspire to sainthood. To make myself bigger is impossible. I have to put up with myself, such as I am, with all my imperfections. But if I want to seek the means of going to heaven by a little way that is very straight, very short, a completely new little way. She speaks later, I would like to find an elevator to lift me up to Jesus, because I'm too little to climb the rough staircase of perfection. So I sought in my body, the holy books, the indication of the elevator that is the object of my desire. And I read these words that came from the mouth of eternal wisdom. Let all who are simple come to my house. St. Teresa beautifully concludes, the elevator that must lift me up to heaven is your arms, Jesus. For that, I don't need to become big. On the contrary, I have to stay little. May I become little, more and more. You see, Simba was just immature when he said, I just cannot wait to be king. He didn't know what he was asking. When we ask to be saints, let's be honest, we don't know what it is we're asking. But it seems certain from these rather important texts that if we are to become a king, we must become a king of nothing.